Hi everybody, Richard here from Richard George Tailoring, and today I wanted to chat with you about the secret weapon that a tailor uses to achieve the perfect fit. You will see from our previous video that fit is a key consideration when creating a beautiful bespoke suit. Fit is, above all, one of the most important aspects of a tailored garment. This is something that a tailor will be able to help you with. For us, it's key that it is not only aesthetically pleasing, but also feels comfortable. A tailor will consider lots of variables when it comes to fit. There are lots of tools to help aid in this: pinning, measuring, fitting garments. But the little known tool that is very rarely used is what's called a toile. A toile was developed by French couturiers many years ago and was considered somewhat of a first draft. If you were using fabrics that were particularly expensive or particularly luxurious, then it would make sense to create a piece from a lower quality fabric as a first draft to ensure that the final piece will be perfect when it comes to cutting the fabric. The material that is often used is somewhat of a calico, muslin, effectively a much cost-effective material. Speaking for ourselves here at Richard George Tailoring, our application of a toile would be going through the normal processes you would do: body measurements, fitting garment. Then a pattern is cut using a Japanese organic cotton which emulates and reflects the fit and feel of what would be the final garment. The material errs on the side of lighter, so when worn you can see more clearly any issues that may be in the figuration or fit, or perhaps the balance or how the sleeve head sits. The toile itself is probably not the most attractive of garments, and I wouldn't recommend anybody wearing them outside of the four walls of the tailor studio. And now I'd like to introduce you to an example of a toile and talk in a little bit more detail exactly what is the defining features of a toile. Here is the toile. As you can see, as I mentioned, not the most attractive piece, but you can see how the light casts shadows in various areas, and this tells us that we need to tweak this pattern slightly. We can see the sleeve head is perhaps not as suited to the shape of the mannequin as it should be. Aesthetically, you can see there are very little design features, as this isn't made to be an attractive piece, it's a tool. There are no pockets. There is no pick stitch that often runs on the edging. The buttons are just a plastic resin, purely functional just to hold the garment together when worn. You'll see on the sleeve there are no buttons, so we can effectively allocate each button to ensure that it sits perfectly to the client's preference. As we move to the interior of this piece, you will see there is nothing. It's very, very minimal. There is no lining, a slight wadding to emulate the drape in the chest, but other than that, it's completely bare. Throughout there are rough edges, it's unfinished, it's unkempt, but this is a first draft. Now, what do we look at when we're considering further adjustments with the toile? We'll look at a number of things. Firstly, we'll ask the client, how does it feel? If it feels tight in certain areas or if it feels a little looser. We'll also look at the closing button. Is this button closing exactly where we need it to? Are we seeing enough shirt? Are we seeing enough tie? Because we can raise or lower that. We would look at the balance. It's important that the hem of the jacket, which is the bottom, sits perfectly parallel with the ground. And this is impacted by how that person stands. Are they erect in their posture? Do they stand up in such a manner that it lifts slightly higher at the front and lower at the back? Are they more stooped, whereby the front would sit longer and the back sits shorter? This is the balance which we need to get absolutely perfectly. The pitch of the sleeve is also key. If the pitch is slightly more back, you will see in the back of the arm creasing, in which case we would need to rotate the sleeve head backwards. If the arm sits slightly more forward, that creasing shifts from the back to the front, in which case we would need to rotate the sleeve head accordingly. We here at Richard George break down the torso in three sections: chest, jacket waist, and hip. And each of those we look at meticulously to ensure perfection. But we can't only look at them individually, we need to consider them holistically. We need to look at how the chest might be impacting the jacket waist, how the jacket waist might be impacting the hip, and adapting accordingly. We want a nice clean silhouette through the chest, no breaking at the chest, which could be a number of issues. The lapel could be too long, in which case we need to shorten it so it sits flush, or it could be too tight, in which it's bowing out. Often seen with people who are bodybuilders, people who work out. The obvious signs of work are horizontal lines or creasing. Now, if these are taut, it would tell us that it's too tight. If there is a gathering of fabric, then it would tell us there is a figuration issue because that fabric has nowhere to go and it needs to be cleaned up. The shoulder line should sit perfectly. Some people will drop right in their shoulder, some people will drop left, some people will drop both. Some people have higher shoulders, and these we look at this moment. We gauge whether we need to drop the right shoulder a little bit more, and this can be quite incremental, just small changes, millimeters in some cases to achieve that perfect fit. If a shoulder isn't sitting right, you will notice creasing just below the chest, and you will notice creasing on the back on the same side that needs work. After a small amount of wear, you will see areas that need work. You can see here on this piece, the sleeve is creasing quite considerably and actually feels quite close. So straight away, I would know that we need to widen the armhole and perhaps even drop the armhole. The armhole should sit just right. Too high and it will feel very uncomfortable. Too low and it will feel restrictive. We want it to sit neatly into the armhole so there is that freedom of movement. For this piece, I can feel that it isn't quite right, so I would look to drop the armhole ever so slightly as it's pinching just into my armhole. I can also feel the width of the armhole is just that little bit snug, so we need to ease that off just a touch. And this is collaborative. This is time where we're speaking with the client. We can't feel what they feel, so we need to ask very targeted questions to gauge that and make the amendments accordingly. There are many other considerations which I won't go into now, but that gives a brief overview. Imagine if this was made using that Loro Piana fabric, that special piece, and now we need to tweak it and adjust it. So the first draft, the toile, is key. When the first fitting is finished and all the information required has been gathered, we then commence make on the final piece. Creating a toile takes time. The whole process all in would probably be around 8 to 10 weeks, dependent on the fabric choices. But something like this, something so important as achieving the perfect garment, should take time in order for it to be done properly. The information gathered, additional measurements, figuration considerations are then gathered and sent to the cutter, who then commences work. The chosen fabric is cut and sewn and that garment is constructed. Now the toile we shared with you today is clearly single-breasted. Double-breasted, there are other considerations to be had. The drape is a little more exaggerated. You obviously have the crossover of fabric to consider, so we would make up a toile in a double-breasted version. This is often quite useful in itself because if somebody is in two minds of should I go single-breasted or should I go double-breasted, the toile will confirm that. We are able to try it on and see for ourselves if that is for us. So, I hope that has been informative and interesting, lifting the veil on some of the tools that tailors will use to achieve the perfect fit for you. If you have never had anything made, I hope this video serves you in understanding what goes into the process and hopefully giving you the confidence to take that first step. It's been a pleasure and I'll see you on the next one.